In the complex chessboard of global energy politics, few moves are as consequential as those made by the world's largest consumer nations. India, with its burgeoning economy and insatiable energy appetite, has emerged as a central player. Its decisions on energy procurement send ripples across the globe, influencing prices, shaping diplomatic alliances, defining the flow of capital. Since early 2022, India has dramatically increased its purchases of Russian crude oil. Today, August 25, 2025, India's decision to dramatically increase its intake of Russian crude oil was driven by a powerful and straightforward logic: compelling economics. Sharp increase in India's oil imports from Russia from 2021 to 2025. In the wake of the 2022 Ukraine conflict, Western sanctions created a unique market distortion. Russia, desperate to find new buyers for its Ural crude, began offering it at significant discounts for a nation like India, which imports over 85% of its crude oil requirements. This was an opportunity too good to ignore. The discounted oil provided a critical buffer against soaring global energy prices, helping the Indian government manage its current account deficit by diversifying its sources of energy. Should India decide to halt its purchases of Russian oil, the first and most immediate impact would be felt within its own economy. The sudden loss of discounted crude would force Indian refiners to turn to the open market, seeking replacement barrels from more expensive sources in the Middle East, Africa, the Americas. This would drive up India's national import bill, squeeze foreign exchange reserves, and widen the current account deficit. Higher crude costs would quickly push pump prices up for gasoline and diesel, fueling domestic inflation and risking public discontent and political headaches for the government. For Russia, the shock would be severe and immediate. India is one of the top two buyers of seaborne Russian crude. The United States and the European Union would view India's decision with a mixture of approval and apprehension. On one hand, it would represent a monumental victory for their sanctions regime against Russia. Cutting off a primary revenue stream for Moscow would weaken the Russian economy diplomatically. It would be hailed as India aligning itself more closely with the Western democratic order. However, this strategic win would come at a significant economic cost. China would find itself in a uniquely advantageous yet precarious position. With India out of the market, China would become Russia's most indispensable customer. For major oil-producing nations, especially Saudi Arabia and the UAE, an Indian halt would be a significant economic boon. A decision by India to stop buying Russian oil would fundamentally redraw the map of global energy flows. Currently, a significant portion of the world's tanker fleet is engaged in the east-west transit of Russian crude to India, to China. If India exits this trade, these specialized routes would become largely redundant. Indian refiners would pivot back to their traditional suppliers, primarily in the Persian Gulf. This would shorten voyage times for Indian imports but would free up a large number of tankers, potentially causing a temporary glut in the shipping market. The immediate and most visible effect would be on global oil prices. At the same time, the price of Russian Ural crude would likely plummet as Moscow struggles to find a home for millions of barrels. This would create a two-tiered global oil market: sanctioned, heavily discounted Russian oil versus higher-priced mainstream crude. Financial, insurance, and legal services that underpin the trade would need rapid reconfiguration. The political and diplomatic consequences of India ending its oil trade with Russia would be profound, signaling a major realignment in its foreign policy. Such a move would be interpreted in Washington as a clear pivot towards the Western camp, and in Brussels as well. Conversely, the relationship between New Delhi and Moscow would be plunged into a deep crisis. Russia would view the move as a betrayal and could retaliate. Moscow could withhold spare parts or delay deliveries of military equipment. Russia might become less supportive of Indian interests in international forums. This shift would also reshape dynamics within BRICS. The vision of BRICS as a unified bloc would be seriously compromised. An India more closely aligned with the West would embolden the Quad. Beijing would view this with alarm and could respond by strengthening ties with Moscow. Looking ahead, several scenarios could unfold. The most likely immediate scenario is a period of managed transition. India would gradually phase them out over several months, coordinating with the United States and Gulf producers. A second, more disruptive scenario could be an abrupt economic shock. This would trigger sharp price spikes and supply chain chaos, a global energy crisis. A third scenario is strategic reversal. Halt, then quiet resumption if costs are unbearable. or opaque channels could persist even amid public cuts. The long-term adaptation requires diversification, investment in renewables and building more resilient supply chains, preparing for a multipolar world where energy equals geopolitical power. Ultimately, India will likely seek a middle path, strategic ambiguity combined with tactical moves to secure its economy. The world must adapt to a reality where a single rising power can create or resolve global crises. This essay explored the consequences if India stops Russian oil imports. We covered immediate economic shocks, impacts on Russia, ripple effects for global markets, and geopolitical shifts. The most likely outcome is a managed partial transition, but uncertainty remains. Countries will need to prioritize diversification and resilience. Subscribe for in-depth analysis, and follow the channel for updates as events unfold.